The moment my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "You're just taking up space in this house now," I realized grief was not the worst thing waiting for me after my husband's funeral. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me what city you're watching from, because some stories deserve to be heard everywhere." The dining room still smelled faintly of the rosemary chicken I had cooked that evening, though nobody seemed interested in eating anymore. The chandelier above the table cast a soft yellow light across the polished oak surface my husband Harold had spent 2 weekends refinishing by hand almost 20 years ago. Every scratch on that table held a memory. Birthday dinners, Christmas mornings, late-night talks over coffee after our son Matthew crashed his first car at 16. Yet that night, sitting across from my son and his wife, the table felt colder than marble. Harold had been gone exactly 9 days. 9 days since I stood beside a grave in a black wool coat while the November wind tore through the cemetery outside Columbus, Ohio. 9 days since I held Matthew's trembling hand during the funeral and believed, foolishly perhaps, that tragedy would pull our family closer together. Instead, it seemed to expose something ugly that had been waiting beneath the surface all along. "You can't stay here forever," Vanessa said casually while scrolling through her phone as if she were commenting on the weather. Her glossy red nails tapped against the screen. She never looked directly at me when she said cruel things. Maybe that made it easier for her. Matthew shifted uncomfortably beside her, but he said nothing. That silence hurt more than her words ever could. I stared at the mashed potatoes on my plate, suddenly unable to swallow. "This is my home," I said quietly. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. Older somehow. Vanessa finally looked up then, her expression flat and impatient. It was Harold's house. And honestly, maintaining a place this big at your age isn't realistic anymore. At your age. Funny how people start speaking to you differently once your hair turns silver. As if love, memories, and dignity expire after. 65. I looked toward Matthew, waiting for him to step in. Waiting for the boy who once cried when I left him at kindergarten. Waiting for the son who used to call me every Sunday before he married Vanessa. But he only rubbed his forehead and sighed. "Maybe a smaller place would be easier, Mom." Easier. Such a harmless-sounding word for something that shattered me completely. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Harold had inherited that clock from his father. Every Sunday, he wound it carefully while humming old Frank Sinatra songs off-key. Now the sound felt like a countdown to the end of something I had spent my whole life protecting. I folded my napkin slowly and placed it beside my untouched dinner plate. My hands trembled, though I refused to let them see how deeply they had wounded me. Vanessa leaned back in her chair with the faintest smile. "There's a very nice senior community about 15 minutes from here," she said. "They have yoga classes and card nights. Women your age love that kind of thing. Women your age. Not my name. Not Matthew's mother. Just a problem to relocate." Outside, rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. I suddenly remembered the night Harold and I bought this house in 1987. We had eaten takeout pizza on the living room floor because we couldn't afford furniture yet. We laughed so hard when the roof leaked during our first thunderstorm that we ended up dancing barefoot with pots catching water around us. We built a life here. Every wall carried proof of it. And now, less than 2 weeks after burying my husband, my own family was discussing where to put me like I was extra furniture nobody wanted anymore. I stood carefully, forcing myself to remain calm. "I think I'm tired," I said softly. Vanessa shrugged and returned to her phone. Matthew finally looked at me, but only for a second. Long enough for me to see guilt buried somewhere deep behind his silence. Not long enough to stop what was happening. I walked upstairs slowly, one hand trailing along the wooden banister Harold had varnished himself last summer. When I reached our bedroom, I closed the door gently and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the light. Harold's reading glasses still rested on the nightstand beside his unfinished mystery novel. His blue cardigan still hung behind the door. For a moment, the grief hit me so hard I could barely breathe. But beneath the grief, something else began quietly taking shape. Something colder, sharper. Because while Vanessa believed she was pushing a lonely widow out of her own home, she had made one terrible mistake. She assumed I had nothing left. I barely slept that night. The rain continued long after everyone went upstairs, tapping softly against the windows like impatient fingers. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to rest and walked downstairs in my robe. The house felt painfully quiet without Harold's steady breathing beside me. For 38 years, I had woken up beside the same man. Even silence sounded different without him. The kitchen light over the stove cast a pale yellow glow across the counters. I stood there for a moment staring at the coffee maker Harold used every morning at exactly 6:15. He liked his coffee black and too hot to drink right away. Every morning, he would take one sip anyway and complain that he burned his tongue. I used to laugh at him for it. Now I would have given anything to hear that complaint one more time. I made myself a cup of tea instead because coffee suddenly felt too painful. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my slippers as I walked toward the living room. Family photos covered the mantel above the fireplace. Matthew at 8 years old holding his first Little League trophy. Our beach vacation in Cape Cod the summer before college. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper covering the floor while Harold pretended not to notice the mess. I picked up one silver frame and traced Harold's smile with my thumb. He always looked at me in photographs like I was the only person in the room. That kind of love is rare. Losing it changes the temperature of your entire world. Upstairs, I heard faint footsteps. Then laughter. Vanessa's laughter. Light and carefree. It drifted down the hallway while I sat there holding my husband's photograph with swollen eyes and trembling hands. Something about that sound cut deeper than I expected. Harold had not even been gone 2 weeks. Yet life upstairs was already moving forward without him. Without me. The next morning, I woke to the sound of cabinet doors slamming in the kitchen. Vanessa was reorganizing again. She had been doing that constantly since the funeral. Moving dishes, rearranging drawers, changing things Harold and I had kept the same for decades. It makes more sense this way, she always said whenever I could not find something. That morning, I walked downstairs and stopped short when I saw 3 cardboard boxes sitting near the dining room wall. My stomach tightened immediately. "What are those?" I asked quietly. Vanessa glanced over her shoulder while pouring almond milk into her coffee. "Oh, just some things from the upstairs closet. I figured we should start clearing out unnecessary stuff." Unnecessary stuff. Inside one open box, I recognized Harold's winter scarves neatly folded beside photo albums from our anniversary trips. My chest tightened so hard it almost hurt to breathe. "I was not ready to go through those yet," I said carefully. Vanessa shrugged without looking concerned. "Holding on to too much keeps people stuck in grief." Matthew entered the kitchen then, adjusting his tie for work. For one brief second, I hoped he would tell her to stop. Instead, he kissed her cheek and reached for his travel mug. "Morning, Mom." Morning. As if nothing was happening. As if my life was not being quietly packed into boxes one piece at a time. I looked at my son standing in the kitchen Harold built with his own hands. The same kitchen where I stitched Halloween costumes at midnight and baked birthday cakes from scratch when money was tight. Matthew would not even meet my eyes for more than a second. That was when I understood something painful. Vanessa was not the only reason I was losing my home. My son was letting it happen. And somehow, that realization hurt even more than the insult she threw at me the night before. I carried my tea into the living room and sat beside the cold fireplace while the sounds of their mourning continued around me like I was already invisible. The following afternoon, I realized Vanessa had started making changes long before she ever spoke those cruel words at dinner. Some discoveries arrive quietly, not with shouting or dramatic confrontations, but through tiny moments that leave a strange heaviness in your chest. I was folding laundry in the upstairs hallway when I noticed the framed family portrait outside Matthew's office was gone. It had hung there for years. Harold in his navy sweater. Me beside him smiling into the autumn sunlight. Matthew standing between us during a trip to Vermont nearly a decade ago. In its place now hung a large abstract painting in dull gray tones that looked cold enough to belong in a hotel lobby. I stood there staring at the empty wall longer than I should have. Later that evening, I went searching for the photograph and found it leaning face down inside the downstairs coat closet behind an old vacuum cleaner. The glass was cracked across Harold's face. "Oh," Vanessa said when she noticed me carrying it carefully into the kitchen. "I meant to tell you. It accidentally fell while I was redecorating." She did not sound sorry. Matthew barely looked up from his phone. "Maybe it is time to update some things around here anyway," he muttered. Update. Another harmless-sounding word that somehow erased 38 years of marriage. I cleaned the broken glass carefully at the sink while neither of them spoke again. My hands moved slowly because Harold always told me I rushed when I was upset. "Slow down," Claire, he used to say with a smile. Nothing good comes from panic. That night, I followed his advice the best I could. I slowed down. I started paying attention. And once I did, the signs became impossible to ignore. The next morning, I opened the hallway closet looking for my winter boots and noticed several of my coats were missing. Not donated. Not moved. Gone. My stomach tightened immediately. I searched the mudroom, the laundry room, even the garage. Nothing. Finally, I asked Vanessa directly. She looked almost amused. Oh, those old coats. I dropped them at Goodwill yesterday. Most of them looked outdated anyway. For a moment, I could not speak. One of those coats had been the camel wool jacket Harold saved for 3 months to buy me during our 25th anniversary. Another was the navy raincoat I wore the day Matthew graduated college. They were not just coats. They were pieces of my life. You had no right, I said quietly. Vanessa crossed her arms. You barely wear half the things you own. The house is cluttered enough already. Cluttered. The word echoed painfully in my mind. I noticed then that even the hallway smelled different lately. Vanessa had replaced Harold's cedarwood candles with sharp artificial floral sprays that made the entire house feel unfamiliar. Everywhere I turned, pieces of my life were quietly disappearing. And Matthew saw all of it. One evening, while Vanessa was upstairs taking a bath, I finally tried speaking to him alone. He stood at the kitchen counter loosening his tie while the microwave hummed softly behind us. For a second, he looked exhausted, older than his 42 years. Matthew, I said gently, are you truly comfortable with everything happening? He froze for only a moment before avoiding my eyes again. Vanessa is just trying to help organize things, Mom. By throwing away my belongings? He sighed heavily like I was the difficult one. You are taking everything personally. Personally. I stared at my son in disbelief. The same boy who once cried for 2 days after accidentally stepping on one of my rose bushes because he hated seeing me upset. Somewhere along the way, that tenderness had disappeared. Or maybe Vanessa had simply taught him to stop noticing my pain. He grabbed his briefcase and headed toward the stairs before pausing halfway up. You should try making this easier on yourself, he said quietly. Then he disappeared upstairs beside the woman, slowly erasing me from my own home. 3 days later, I found Harold's handwritten note exactly where he always kept it, inside the top drawer of his nightstand beneath a stack of old receipts and reading glasses he no longer needed. I had opened the drawer searching for a battery for the small flashlight he used during thunderstorms, but instead my fingers brushed against a folded piece of cream-colored paper, with my name written across the front in his careful block handwriting. Claire. Just seeing his handwriting again nearly brought me to my knees. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed, holding the letter with both hands while late afternoon sunlight spilled across the quilt we bought together during our trip to Tennessee years ago. Outside the bedroom window, the maple tree in the backyard swayed gently in the November wind. Harold planted that tree the year Matthew turned 10. Something should still be growing long after we are gone, he told me back then. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. Claire, if you are reading this, then I probably did not get the chance to say everything I needed to say. I stopped breathing for a moment. Harold had always been practical, organized, the kind of man who labeled storage bins in the garage and paid bills 2 weeks early. But this felt different, personal, intimate in a way that made the room suddenly feel smaller around me. You spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Me, Matthew, this home. Do not let anyone make you feel like you are less important just because I am no longer there beside you. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stop the sound rising in my throat. Downstairs, I could hear faint laughter from the television where Vanessa was watching one of her reality shows. The contrast made my chest ache. Harold's words wrapped around me like a warm blanket in the middle of winter. He saw me. Even now, somehow he still saw me. I continued reading slowly. I know our son loves you. But love can become weak when people stop thinking for themselves. If things ever feel wrong after I am gone, trust your instincts. You are stronger than you realize. Tears blurred the page. Harold never wasted words. Every sentence carried weight, meaning. I remembered the way he used to squeeze my hand under restaurant tables whenever he sensed I felt uncomfortable around Vanessa. He noticed things before I did. Looking back now, I realized there had been warning signs for years. Small moments I ignored because I wanted peace more than honesty. The Christmas Vanessa rolled her eyes when Harold insisted I sit at the head of the table. The time she joked that old people collected useless junk while standing in my living room surrounded by antiques passed down through my family. The vacation where she booked herself and Matthew an oceanfront suite while Harold and I were placed beside the noisy ice machine, even though we paid for half the trip. Harold noticed every slight. He simply chose kindness over conflict. Maybe I had done the same for too long. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest while staring around the bedroom we built together one paycheck at a time. The oak dresser Harold refinished by hand. The faded blue curtains we picked out at a department store 30 years ago because they reminded me of the lake where we spent our honeymoon. Every inch of that room carried our history. And downstairs, someone was slowly trying to erase it all. For the first time since Harold died, the grief inside me shifted slightly. It was still there, heavy, sharp, but beneath it, something steadier began taking shape. Not anger exactly, clarity. Because Harold had been right about one thing. Something was very wrong in this house. And for the first time, I stopped questioning whether I was imagining it. The following Sunday, my younger sister Diane stopped by unexpectedly carrying a foil tray of lasagna balanced carefully in both hands. The cold air rushed into the foyer behind her as she stepped inside wearing her long brown coat and knitted gloves. For one brief moment, the smell of baked cheese and tomato sauce made the house feel almost normal again. Diane had always brought food during difficult times. When Matthew broke his arm at 12, when Harold had pneumonia one winter, when our father died nearly 20 years ago. Some people show love through words. Diane showed it by feeding people. "You look tired," she said softly after studying my face for only a second. I forced a smile and took the tray from her hands. I suppose grief is not very flattering. But Diane did not laugh. Her eyes moved quietly past me toward the staircase before lowering again. "Can we talk privately?" she asked. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten immediately. I led her into the den while Vanessa remained upstairs on a video call loud enough for half the house to hear. Diane sat stiffly on the edge of Harold's old leather chair, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "Claire," she began carefully, "I almost did not say anything because I did not want to upset you more than you already are." My chest tightened. "What is it?" Diane hesitated for several seconds before speaking again. "Last Thursday, I ran into Vanessa at Brookstone Senior Living." I blinked in confusion. Brookstone was one of the retirement communities outside town, the same one Vanessa mentioned during dinner. "Maybe she was gathering information," I said quietly, though even to my own ears the explanation sounded weak. Diane looked uncomfortable. "Claire, she was not just gathering information. I overheard her speaking with one of the staff members." The room suddenly felt colder. Diane lowered her voice. She asked about wait lists, pricing, what furniture would fit in a one-bedroom unit. I stared at her without speaking. Somewhere upstairs, Vanessa laughed loudly at something on her computer. Diane continued carefully. "I only recognized her because she was showing pictures on her phone. Pictures of your house." My fingers tightened around my teacup so hard I thought it might crack. "What kind of pictures?" Diane swallowed hard. "The kitchen, the backyard, your bedroom." For a moment, all I could hear was the soft ticking of Harold's clock in the hallway. Tick, 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 steady and calm while my entire world tilted again beneath my feet. She said the house would be perfect for entertaining once they updated everything. Diane's eyes filled with sympathy. "Claire, I do not think they are planning for you to stay here much longer." The words settled over me slowly like freezing rain. Part of me wanted to deny it, to insist there had to be some misunderstanding. But another part of me already knew Diane was telling the truth. Vanessa had been preparing for this long before Harold died. The boxes, the missing coats, the way she kept calling my belongings clutter. She was not helping me grieve. She was clearing space. Diane reached across and squeezed my hand gently. "I am sorry," she whispered. I stared down at our joined hands in silence. My skin looked thinner these days. Older. Harold used to kiss the back of my hands absent-mindedly while watching television together at night. Funny how grief hides inside the smallest memories. "Does Matthew know?" I asked finally. Diane hesitated just long enough to answer me without words. My chest tightened painfully. "Claire," she said softly, "I think your son may be letting her make all the decisions." Upstairs, footsteps crossed the hallway above us. Vanessa moving confidently through my home like it already belonged to her. And sitting there beside my sister, I realized something terrifying. They were not waiting for me to leave willingly anymore. They were already planning the life they wanted after I was gone. That evening, I did something Vanessa never expected. I stopped reacting. No arguments. No tears. No wounded expressions she could dismiss as emotional overreactions from an aging widow. I simply became quiet. Careful. Observant. There is power in silence when people assume you are too broken to notice what is happening around you. Vanessa mistook my calm for surrender almost immediately. The next morning, she hummed cheerfully while replacing the framed family photographs in the hallway with black and white city prints she bought online. Matthew helped her hang them before leaving for work. Neither of them asked what I thought. Neither seemed to realize I was standing 10 feet away watching them erase decades of memories one nail at a time. "This brightens the place up," Vanessa said while adjusting one crooked frame. "The house finally feels modern." Modern. I folded Harold's old cardigan across my lap and said nothing. That seemed to make her more comfortable than ever. Over the next several days, I noticed even more changes. Vanessa started referring to the upstairs guest room as my room instead of the bedroom Harold and I shared. One afternoon, I returned from the grocery store and discovered several of my books missing from the living room shelves. Another trip to Goodwill, apparently. She even switched Harold's favorite jazz station presets in the car without asking. Tiny things. Petty things. But together they formed a clear message. Your life here is ending. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I overheard Vanessa speaking on the phone in the kitchen while she believed I was upstairs napping. "The timeline depends on whether she cooperates," she whispered. I froze halfway down the staircase, my hand tightening around the wooden railing. Matthew still feels guilty sometimes, but he knows this is the practical solution. A long pause followed, then a soft laugh. "Honestly, once she moves out, we are tearing out the entire downstairs. The wallpaper alone screams 1992. My chest tightened painfully, but I stayed perfectly still. There it was. Not concern for my well-being. Not grief. Not family. Renovation plans. Design choices. A future where Harold's home became their fresh start while I sat alone in a retirement apartment somewhere beside strangers playing bingo under fluorescent lights. I quietly stepped back upstairs before she noticed me listening. Inside the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at Harold's letter again. "Trust your instincts. You are stronger than you realize." The words settled differently inside me now. Stronger did not mean louder. It meant steadier, smarter. That evening, Matthew knocked softly on the bedroom door for the first time in days. "Mom?" he asked carefully. I looked up from folding laundry. He lingered awkwardly near the doorway, avoiding eye contact again. "Vanessa found a nice place for you to tour this weekend," he said. "Just to look." I studied my son quietly. His tie hung loose around his neck. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. For a brief moment, he looked like the exhausted young father who used to fall asleep holding his infant daughter during family visits years ago. But then he glanced nervously toward the hallway where Vanessa's footsteps echoed downstairs, and the softness disappeared again. "You already made the appointment?" I asked. "We are just trying to help," he muttered. Help. That word almost made me smile now. Funny how cruel people always hide behind gentle language. I folded another towel slowly before answering. "All right," I said calmly. Matthew blinked in surprise. "All right. I will go look." Relief spread across his face so quickly it almost embarrassed him. "Good," he said quietly. "That is good." After he left the room, I sat there listening to his footsteps retreat down the hallway toward the life Vanessa was carefully building around him. Then I reached for my phone on the nightstand and dialed a number I had not called in nearly 3 years. Harold's attorney answered on the second ring. Harold's attorney was named Richard Bennett, and hearing his calm, familiar voice again felt strangely comforting. He and Harold had played golf together for nearly 15 years before Harold's arthritis made it too painful to continue. "Claire," he said gently after I introduced myself, "I was very sorry to hear about Harold." I thanked him quietly while sitting alone in the bedroom with the door locked. Downstairs, I could hear Vanessa unloading groceries while cabinet doors slammed sharply through the house. "I need to ask you something," I said carefully. There was a brief pause on the line before his voice lowered slightly. "Of course." I stared at the rain sliding down the bedroom windows. Did Harold leave everything exactly the way Matthew believes he did? Silence. Not long. Just long enough to make my pulse quicken. "Why are you asking me that?" Richard replied cautiously. I closed my eyes for a moment. Because I think my daughter-in-law has been planning to remove me from this house since before Harold died. Another pause followed. Then the sound of papers shifting softly in the background. Claire, Richard said slowly, I think we should meet in person. 2 days later, I told Vanessa I was going shopping for winter shoes. She barely looked up from her laptop when I left. Do not forget we are touring Brookstone tomorrow at noon, she called from the kitchen. I will remember, I answered calmly. The sky over Columbus hung low and gray as I drove downtown past familiar streets decorated for Christmas. Red ribbons wrapped around lamp posts. Store windows glowing warmly against the cold November afternoon. Harold used to love this time of year. He always insisted on buying too many lights for the front yard, even though half of them stopped working by New Year's Day. I parked outside Richard Bennett's office building with trembling hands. The elevator ride to the 6th floor felt strangely long. When I stepped into his office, Richard looked older than I remembered. More silver in his hair. Reading glasses perched lower on his nose. But his expression softened immediately when he saw me. Claire, he said quietly, standing to hug me gently. Please sit down. His office smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Harold always liked that smell. I sat carefully across from Richard's desk while he opened a thick folder with my husband's name printed neatly across the front. There are things Harold instructed me not to discuss unless certain circumstances arose, he said carefully. My stomach tightened immediately. What kind of circumstances? Richard folded his hands together. Specifically, if anyone attempted to pressure you into leaving the property or making financial decisions while emotionally vulnerable. For a moment, I simply stared at him. Harold expected this? Richard sighed softly. Not exactly, but he worried. He removed several papers from the folder and slid them carefully across the desk toward me. 3 years ago, Harold transferred the deed entirely into your name through a survivorship arrangement. I blinked in confusion. What does that mean? Richard's expression remained calm. It means the house legally belongs to you, Claire. Completely. Matthew has no ownership claim whatsoever. The room went perfectly still around me. I looked down at the paperwork, but the words blurred together through sudden tears. Harold knew Vanessa was becoming controlling. Richard continued carefully. He wanted to make certain you could never be forced out of your own home. My chest tightened so sharply I pressed a hand against it. All this time, Vanessa believed she was slowly pushing me toward the door. And all this time, Harold had quietly protected me without ever saying a word. Richard leaned forward slightly. There is something else. He handed me another document from the file. Harold also created a trust. Most of the family assets remain under your control while you are living. I stared at the numbers in stunned silence. Vanessa and Matthew believed they were inheriting everything immediately. They believed this house was already becoming theirs. Richard watched me carefully across the desk. Claire, he said gently, does your son know any of this? Slowly, I shook my head. And for the very first time since Harold's funeral, I felt something inside me steady completely. Because now I finally understood why Vanessa was in such a hurry to erase me. She thought I was the obstacle standing between her and the life she wanted. What she did not realize was that the obstacle owned everything. The next morning, I agreed to tour Brookstone. Vanessa nearly smiled when I came downstairs dressed neatly in my cream sweater and dark slacks. I think this will really help you move forward, she said brightly while pouring herself coffee. Move forward. Another polished phrase hiding something much uglier underneath. Matthew looked relieved as he grabbed his car keys from the counter. It is just a visit, Mom, he added carefully. I nodded calmly and picked up my coat. Of course. During the drive, Vanessa spent 20 minutes talking about community activities, exercise classes, and how wonderful it would be for me to be around people my own age. I stared quietly out the passenger window while bare November trees blurred past beside the highway. Harold used to drive this same road every fall just to look at the changing leaves. He always claimed Ohio maples turned redder than anywhere else in America. Brookstone sat on a carefully landscaped property with trimmed hedges and bright wreaths hanging from every window. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and cinnamon candles. Pleasant, clean, carefully designed to feel welcoming without ever feeling personal. A young woman named Melissa guided us through model apartments while Vanessa asked endless questions about waiting lists and storage space. Would a king bed even fit in here? She asked casually while standing inside the tiny bedroom. Melissa smiled politely. Most residents downsized to queen beds. Residents. The word echoed strangely in my mind. Not homeowners. Not families. Residents. Temporary people waiting quietly for the end of their lives. I walked slowly toward the apartment window overlooking the parking lot below. Two elderly women sat together on a bench wearing matching pastel coats while staring silently at traffic beyond the gates. Neither looked unhappy exactly, just distant somehow, like pieces of themselves had been left somewhere else long ago. "It is cozy, right?" Vanessa asked brightly behind me. Cozy. I remembered our bedroom at home with Harold's books stacked unevenly on the nightstand and the old blue armchair where he drank coffee every Sunday morning. That was cozy. This place felt carefully managed, like a hotel where nobody ever checked out. During the tour, Melissa mentioned there was currently a 6-month wait list unless someone needed immediate placement due to family hardship circumstances. Vanessa nodded thoughtfully at that. Too thoughtfully. I noticed everything now. Every glance. Every calculated smile. Back in the parking lot, Matthew finally spoke after nearly an hour of silence. "What do you think, Mom?" I looked at my son standing beside the car while cold wind tugged at his jacket. For the first time in weeks, I did not see guilt in his eyes. I saw expectation. He believed this was already decided. "I think," I said calmly, "that it is very nice for people who choose to live here." Vanessa's smile stiffened slightly. "Well, obviously transitions take time emotionally." "I imagine they do," I replied softly. On the drive home, I remained quiet while Vanessa filled the silence with decorating ideas for the house once extra rooms were no longer necessary. She spoke so casually that I almost admired the confidence. She truly believed I was defeated already. That evening, after dinner, I carried a small cardboard box downstairs and placed it carefully near the front hallway. Vanessa noticed immediately. "Starting to pack?" she asked, unable to hide the satisfaction in her voice. I smiled gently for the first time in weeks. Something like that. Inside the box had only a few old magazines and unused kitchen towels. Nothing important. But Vanessa looked so pleased watching that box by the door that I finally understood the dangerous mistake she had made. She believed silence meant weakness because she had never met anyone patient enough to wait for the right moment. Harold understood patience. And after 38 years beside him, so did I. Over the next week, I let Vanessa believe she was winning. Sometimes the easiest way to reveal someone's true intentions is to stop standing in their way. The cardboard box by the hallway slowly multiplied into 3 boxes, though most of them contained things I no longer cared about keeping. Old magazines, duplicate kitchen utensils, worn blankets from the linen closet. Vanessa watched each new box appear with poorly hidden excitement. "It is good to simplify," she said one afternoon while sipping iced coffee at the kitchen island. "Fresh starts can be healthy." Fresh starts. She talked about my entire life like it was clutter after a garage sale. But I only nodded politely and continued wrapping dishes in newspaper. Meanwhile, Richard Bennett quietly handled everything else. 3 days after our meeting downtown, certified paperwork arrived confirming the deed transfer and trust details. I kept the documents locked inside Harold's old fireproof safe in the bedroom closet. The same safe Vanessa still believed contained only insurance papers and tax records. One evening, while Matthew showered upstairs, Vanessa poured herself a glass of wine and sat across from me in the living room. Christmas music played softly from the radio beside the fireplace. Outside, snow drifted lazily across the front lawn Harold loved so much. Vanessa crossed one elegant leg over the other and studied me carefully. "I know this transition has been difficult," she began in the same voice people use with nervous children and hospice patients. I folded another towel calmly without responding. She leaned forward slightly. "But honestly, Claire, this house is too much responsibility for someone alone." There it was again. Someone alone. Not a wife. Not a mother. Just an aging inconvenience. "You and Matthew seem very eager for me to leave," I said quietly. For the first time in weeks. Vanessa looked mildly uncomfortable. Only for a second. Then the polished smile returned. "We just want what is best for everyone." Everyone. Funny how everyone never seemed to include me anymore. I looked around the living room slowly. The cream-colored sofa Harold insisted was too expensive until he secretly bought it for my birthday. The brick fireplace where Matthew used to hang his childhood stockings every Christmas Eve. The hardwood floors still marked with faint scratches from our golden retriever 20 years ago. Every inch of that room carried proof of a life built carefully over decades. Vanessa saw square footage. I saw history. Do you ever think about how quickly things change? I asked softly. She blinked in surprise at the question. What do you mean? I smiled faintly. One day, someone believes a house belongs to them. Then suddenly they discover they never understood the full story at all. Her expression flickered briefly, confusion mixed with irritation. But before she could respond, Matthew walked downstairs toweling his wet hair. Everything okay? He asked. Perfectly fine, I answered gently. Vanessa picked up her wine glass again, though I noticed her watching me more carefully afterward. Later that night, after they went upstairs, I remained alone beside the Christmas tree until nearly midnight. The colored lights reflected softly across the dark windows while snow continued falling outside. Harold always stayed up late decorating the tree because he believed every branch needed balance. Too many ornaments on one side, and the whole thing leans crooked, he used to say. Sitting there in the quiet living room, I finally realized something important. Vanessa believed this was about property, money, rooms, ownership. But she misunderstood the one thing Harold understood perfectly. This house was never just a building to me. It was the physical memory of an entire life. And I was no longer willing to let anyone erase it while pretending they were doing me a favor. Upstairs, I heard footsteps crossing the hallway above me. Vanessa moving confidently through a home she already imagined controlling completely. I reached down calmly and switched off the Christmas tree lights one by one until the entire room fell dark except for the soft glow of snow outside the windows. Then I smiled quietly to myself for the first time since Harold died. Because the timing was almost right.